My name is Adrian Butterworth. I'm a demonstrator in media production and Point 4 lecturer in media production, and that's at Bournemouth University in the Faculty of Media and Communication. From a media perspective, clearly the media industry is relatively competitive compared to a lot of others. And actually, although the competitiveness is not as bad as it used to be, because we've now got over 1,000 television channels and all of social media and everything else going on, I would still give the same advice that's always given, which is to get some work experience, get to know what the industry is about, just from the point of view of creating something that's already on your CV, showing, being able to evidence your enthusiasm for what that, for your love for that area, but also getting an insight into what it's really all about. I mean, the worst thing that can happen to a student is to get towards the end of their first year and decide, actually, this is not what I thought it was. I'm not into this anymore. I am going home. I didn't either. I didn't need sixth form because I was going to be a multi-millionaire rock star, and apparently they don't need A-levels. So when I failed them the first time, I didn't think I needed them the second time either, and failed again. So I went off and I worked as a plumber for a couple of years. I was a Cala gas engineer, which I really enjoyed, but then was made redundant and thought, I'm a bit older, a bit wiser, and actually perhaps I ought to give this college thing a bit of a crack. And I did an access course because I didn't have those A-levels. I couldn't come straight to do a degree. I thought I'd do an access course for a year and see if there's any possibility, because I'm only a plumber. But I did, I went and I loved it. And I learned Spanish and I learned German, and I did a media course, but on the access course you do other things as well. And loved it, and then got a place in Falmouth, the Falmouth College of Arts as it was then. It's now University or something. And I did an undergraduate degree in broadcasting, which was brilliant. There we are, it's on silent. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. I did expect all the way through third year, I expected somebody to tap me on the shoulder and say, Adrian, you're a plumber. Go home now. But they didn't. I did all right in the marks. I did enjoy myself as well, I have to say. I ended up with a 2-1. And then I left there. I worked in local radio for a year as a journalist and thought, well, maybe I ought to get some journalistic qualifications. And so I went and I did what was in those days called a postgraduate diploma in broadcast journalism. It's now a master's qualification with a little bit added on to the end. So I did my PG dip, as they were called, and then went and worked full-time in ultra-local television. So I worked at Taunton TV, which was a very small little TV station. But we had 110,000 people in our patch, 47% tuned in every day. So that means that 50-odd thousand people a night watched me on TV in a very small area. It meant my fame was huge in Taunton and Wellington, but I could drive 5 miles down the road and nobody heard of me. So it was in a way the ideal type of fame. You'd walk into a shop and you hear somebody say Taunton TV somewhere behind you. It gives you a bit of a weird impression of the world, because the people that come up and talk to you in those sorts of situations are those that don't have the inhibitions that most people have. So you get a slightly different perception of the world, but very pleasant experience overall. You know, I used to cut the ribbon at the fete and hand out the darts trophies and all that sort of thing. Yeah, so I did that for a couple of years. And then I ran one in Bristol, and then moved to the south coast to run 2 very large ones in Portsmouth and Southampton. And I was, so in Taunton, I started off as news editor, and I'd read the news, and I'd been a reporter for the news for 18 months, I'd been a reporter for 18 months as well. And then when I came to the south coast, I was then head of broadcast operations. So I was in charge of 2 TV stations, 35 staff, and ran that for, I don't know, probably 2, maybe 3 years. And then, and was advising at parliamentary level about the future of ultra-local journalism, and we were getting very excited about digital licenses coming online and things like that. But then, because Freeview had come along and we couldn't get space at that point on the Freeview service, the bottom fell out. We just couldn't get the advertising revenue. And so I had to go and look for employment elsewhere in television, and ended up working mainly in shopping TV in London. The old adage that you should be good to people on the way up because you'll be seeing them on the way back down again came true, and it ended up being very beneficial, because not only did I get into working in London in the first place because of people I was working with at the time, but there was one day when I walked into one channel to work as a camera operator on the studio floor. And was being shown around by the production manager. We walked into the gallery, and the producer of the live programme basically stopped everything, turned around and went, "You're Adrian Butterworth!" And it turned out that she'd done a work placement at Southampton Television.
Okay.
And so she was sort of quite an awe, which is a weird situation because I'm then, although I was older than her and clearly more experienced, still she was the producer of a live national television channel that day. And I'm like, wow, you know, so it's really nice when those things reverse. We ended up best of friends. I used to give her a lift to work every day. And I saw very rapid promotion through that particular company. Other companies, there was another one where somebody had written their first ever reference, had gone and worked for this TV company, worked all the way through until she'd become channel manager, and she gave me some freelance work there. So that was, you know, that was nice. So I did that for a few years and then came and worked. Now, this is up to 2007, I think. Came and worked at a friend. It's a bit of a coincidence. Driving to Bournemouth to go for a day on the beach, and the people in the car said, which beach should we go to? I'm like, I don't know, I've been Bournemouth. But one of my editors at Southampton TV lives in Bournemouth. I'll give him a ring. So I rang him while we're stuck in a traffic jam, hands-free on it. And he said, oh, you should go down to Westbourne. By the way, there's a job going at my work. I'm like, where do you work now? Bournemouth University. So I went and I said, how much you get paid? And I'm like, well, that's half what I get paid. And he said, well, just come and have a chat. You never know. You might want to end up working in a university. I'm like, no. People who can do, people who can't teach. And that's what I said to him. So I went to the interview, and before I knew it, had been talked into it. And was like, well, it's freelance, all the stuff in London, so I can come back to that any time. I'll come and teach. So I taught for the first term. We were still terms before semesters then. I really enjoyed it. I went back up to London for a week at Christmas, and over £1,000 in a week, which was a lot of money in those. A lot of money now, a lot of money in those days. But didn't enjoy it that much, and thought, no, I think teaching's probably, it's not, the money's not good, but I think maybe that is my future. So I finished the 1-year contract then, got a master's, upgraded my postgraduate diploma to a full master's in multimedia journalism. And then the contract ran out, and there wasn't a position. There just wasn't a position. They'd made some redundancies at that time. There was no position, and the local police force were advertising for an embedded journalist to film all their activity to use for internal comms and training purposes. I'm like, I don't think I've ever wanted to work for a police force. And another friend talked me into went to the interview in a police station, which was scary. I'd never been in a police station. And we chatted and everything seemed to be going well. And then they started talking about health and safety, how important it was. And I'd had health and safety training at Bournemouth University. So I answered the question framed around that. And they were basically, you've got the job. Not only have you got all the production skills, you're also very aware of the type of dangers that we're involved with. And well, yeah, I suppose so. As a journalist, dynamic risk assessment, which is what the police feel. Anyway, point being, I got the job with the police and spent 3 years filming all sorts of things, from the exciting stuff you'd expect, like dawn raids and filming people on mobile phones in their cars and stuff like that, but all the way through to some really interesting work around victims of very serious crime, who we did a lot of work around because the stories were always very, very similar. It didn't matter whether it was sexual abuse or domestic violence or, you know, those sorts of situations where there's an abuser in a close situation. As soon as the victim reports it to the police, it's the start of sometimes a long journey, but the start of a journey to everything being put right. And so we did a number of media interviews with victims that the type of victim that you couldn't just ask to speak to a cross-section of journalists, that needed to speak to somebody that they knew was on their side. So we did those interviews. They were released to the media. They went all over the place. Sometimes the identity of the interviewee, sometimes they wanted their identities to be known. But what we saw was a big increase in reported crimes of that nature, of serious crimes. So it had a big impact in people coming forward and actually reporting those crimes. And not only that, but the victims that were interviewed absolutely every single one said what a cathartic experience it was and how it changed their own opinions about their experiences, because they'd only ever been asked before by professionals about what happened next, what time did that happen. It's all factual information. As a journalist, I was the first person that sat down and said, you know, how did you feel? What was your experience going through like that? Because I was looking for their story. So that was intriguing work. And then, unfortunately, the Conservative government halved the police budgets, and it was clear that I wasn't answering 999 calls and that I perhaps ought to look for something else. They offered voluntary severance, so I took a very generous handshake and set my own little viral video business up. And I ran a YouTube viral video business for 3 years called Adelia Television. It's still online. I don't operate it anymore, but the website's still live somewhere, some corner of the internet. And at the same time as I left Dorset Police and started that, my daughter was born. I literally had this wonderful, I took 1 week paternity leave as my last week of employment with the police. And so I was a stay-at-home dad for 3 years and was able to see, and be with my daughter for those very important first 3 years. My wife worked very hard as a nurse during that time, for which I'll thank her forever. And she obviously still had a huge part in my daughter's young life. But I also, as a father, had a part that most fathers never get a chance to do. Mind you, it was funny, after 3 years when I went back to work, literally in the first week after I went back to work, having for 3 years come to me for food, for comfort when she hurt herself and to go to sleep and all those sorts of things, she'd switched over to her mother like that in that first week. The mother-daughter tie is so... Anyway, so from there, I worked briefly in a marketing department for a telecoms company, and then a position came up at Dorset Police again. So after 7 years, I returned to Dorset Police, Bournemouth University. And it was a wonderful role. It's the one I'm still in now, 5 years later. And in that time, I've gone and got a postgraduate certificate in education. I started a PhD for a few years and struggled to manage time and to make it work. And I failed the major review, which is at the halfway stage type thing, where you get into the very serious part of the PhD. I didn't get through that part, but I was supported by some very nice colleagues and applied and was successfully got on to the second year of the doctorate in education. So I'm still going through doctorate education, and I have now just passed, very recently, after 1 year, passed my transfer of doctorate education. So I've got through that very difficult milestone. But the reason for telling you that is that I think one thing that's very easy to do, especially for academics, is for us to tell you about our qualifications in quite a matter-of-fact way, and not perhaps be very open that sometimes we struggle too. So having done 6 adult qualifications, so with access course, undergraduate degree, postgraduate diploma, postgraduate certificate, masters, and PhD, and now EdDoc, so 7th one really. Some of those I have been the A+ student. I've been the top of the class, the postgraduate certificate in teaching practice. I was one of the top in the class. And my undergraduate degree, I was one of the best in the class. But I've also struggled as well. So it's not always an easy straight path. Yes, absolutely, if you attend every lecture and every seminar, you have a much better chance of doing well. If you have the time to put the time into your studies, you are more likely to do well. But sometimes also it's just not our time. And sometimes it's knowing when to draw a line under that as well. But on the other side of the coin, sometimes it just works. It's brilliant.
So I really appreciate you giving us your background of how you got to where you were. Because I feel like with students, obviously, when we come to university, we don't know what path is like after university, what we want to do. And you've obviously shown you have the credentials you've had the experience, you've had the background. And I think one thing that was good to say at the end, obviously, like you said yourself, is I know for myself, I don't think about my lecture more past than the actual lessons. So to hear that obviously you had your own struggles even till today of what you're going through as a lecturer, I think that would be powerful for students to know you don't know what your lecturer is still doing till this day. Because obviously you see lectures and you think, you teach me this subject, and then you go home to your family. Obviously that's the way I kind of interpreted it. But then obviously hearing that from you, it makes me think about what other things my lecturers would be interested in, what they're also doing outside of their life to do with university.
I think it's very, very important, and I draw very much on my personal experiences and try to be very honest and very open with students, because I think that on one side of the coin, lecturers should be aspirational characters that people, undergraduates can look up and look, well, look, this person's had a great career. But also we need to be fallible. We need to be able to say, yes, sometimes it's not easy, and we've been through it. And some things that I've experienced in life, I've found incredibly useful and think that other people can benefit from as well. So for instance, all through my life, I thought that to be a good singer, you had to be born with this natural talent. There's possibly an element of truth there, but I thought that was absolute. And I played guitar all my life in bands, and have always wished I could sing. 3 years ago, got pushed into doing it through a combination of circumstances, too complicated to go into here. But it was, I just ended up having singing lessons without meaning to. And straight away, the singing teacher said, you can sing if you're not tone deaf. You'll be able to learn to sing. It's just hard work. I'm like, no. Singers are naturally gifted. No, they're not. They're egotists that are disingenuous about how hard they've worked to get where they are. That's what they are. Oh, okay, all right, I'll give it a go. So having had a bass player leave the band twice because I can't sing, a year ago, I finally got good enough that we started playing regularly in the local pubs around Bournemouth. And if it wasn't for lockdown, you'd be able to find me in a pub most weekends now singing professionally. So to go from not being able to sing to being able to sing professionally, I think is the strongest example I can think of. But there are many times when I have found that pure effort will get me over the line with stuff that I thought I never could do. The thing that defeats us most often is our own beliefs that we can't do it. And
so if we now go into advice in different categories, if we first start, advice for students who want to come and study media at university as a general, not specifically Bournemouth, but what advice would you give to students who obviously, so they're in sixth form, that they might be taking media as a course, or they might be curious of media as a university course. What kind of pathway / guidance could you say to them?
There's lots of different things to say here, and of course I'm only going to state my own opinion through my own experience, which is fair enough. You've got me here, but I think as far as pathways are concerned, they're not quite as obvious as you might think they are. The most important thing, if you are interested in media, as I said before, is you should go and try it. Go and work in your local radio station or regional television or newspaper, whatever it is, or website. Nowadays, there's such a huge array of. When I went to university, there were 4 television channels. When I graduated, there were 5. There's now over 1,000. So the jobs are there. You can go and do work experience. So do that and check it. But also, it's not necessarily all about going and doing degrees in media. I did, and obviously the students that I directly trained do as well. But I can't tell you how many people I've met in the media who did not do a degree that was media related. For instance, there were a lot of people I worked with in broadcast journalism who came through the route of international relations or other ways, but there are quite a few. I mean, you meet a lot of financial journalists who clearly didn't come through a media degree, but came through either accountancy or something like that, that perhaps didn't study something entirely different. There's a chap I know who was a television presenter on a legal channel, and obviously his background was in law. So yeah, it's not as
black and white as just this is
no. And then with all of these things, pick something that you're going to enjoy. Pick a place that feels right and go for it. Whatever you do will be right for you by its inevitability, really. I think most people who go to university enjoy the process. You're going to a place that's your first time of living away. You've got lots of friends. Although your classes feel relentless and as though they're a tremendous amount of work, they're nothing compared to a 9-to-5 job. And I think most students, if you actually sort of nailed them down and said, yeah, all right, yeah, I work in the local supermarket in the holidays, it's relentless. Whereas the few hours a week I'm expected to be in seminars and lectures is not so bad. But sometimes, the problem with university and undergraduate degrees is that you're responsible for your own work. And so sometimes that feels more pressured. But anyway, to get back to the advice, yeah, as I say, do what feels right, because you really don't know what the future is going to hold. One of the pieces of advice I give a lot is that careers are non-linear these days, in that there's not many people that I know that have left university, gone into the job that they qualified for, and then stayed there for the next 30 years in the same company. There are a few, but most people jump around, especially in the media. 2 years is a good amount of time to work in a media job. But yeah, that's it really. Relax, I think. Relax. Take it easy.
What advice would you give to students who've just started university?
I can give you some good advice about that on the academic side. One of the funny things about media degrees is that students, and I remember 30 years ago when I was at university, people doing the same thing. They tend to talk about the practical side of the course as being what it's about, the filming, the running around with cameras, the editing. And you hear this all the time, go, I hate the theory, which of course, traditionally, academia was theory, was books, was libraries. And we have various models of how we should study, but ultimately all of them include an amount of academic study to justify the moniker of an undergraduate degree. But I have quite a strong point to make there. Some of our more vocational courses that teach you how to to work in the media don't have a huge amount of academic content, but seize what is there and enjoy it and get your teeth into it and read a few books. And I know I'm going to say that it's very stereotypical, but there's a good reason for saying that. When I left university, we thought that learning how to use the cameras and the edit suites was the most important thing we were there for. Now, I learned to edit audio tape with a razor blade. That was in 1999. We used to cut the tape with a razor blade. We'd mark it with a little pencil, Chinagraph pencil, a little yellow Chinagraph pencil, mark the tape. We'd pick up a razor blade and we'd cut it at a 45 degree, well, at an angle, I think it was 45 degrees, on a cutting block that was on the tape deck. This is when I was doing, this when I was taught this at university. I did a work placement during university at the BBC in Jersey. That's how I did it. And then you go to the end of your edit point, you cut it again with a razor blade, and then you stick the tape back together with a little bit of special tape. And then you thread it back on and it played again. So that was analog editing in 1999. That was sound editing. On the video front, we had VHS tapes, great big black plastic tapes. You probably just about remember them. And we'd have two machines on one side of the desk, and we'd have one machine on the other side of the desk. And we would put tape that we recorded our rushes, recorded from our camera. We'd put two of the tapes in one side and we'd put a recorder tape in the other. And then you had to mark in points on a little digital control panel. So we're digital, and that would control this one to play back and this one to start recording at the same time at the right point. And then that one would stop, and then this one would play to make the edit into the next clip if you had two machines. It was that complicated. Anyway, point B, I graduated, went to work at the BBC that I'd done work placement at, and they handed me a mini disc. Completely digital format. Okay. No tape and type, no razor blades, no sticky tape, but a mini disc with a little tiny LCD screen, which I had to mark in and out points in time code. So it was brilliant. I meant I could sit in my car and edit my news packages, but it was an entirely different skill set to that I'd spent 3 years learning. In video, it was a few years later, but not that many years later, probably 2-3 years later, that I was editing on computer, on non-linear suites. So I went from linear suites with the tape to editing non-linear. I don't think it was that much later. Anyway, you get the point. It marches on very quickly. Not only that, but the workflows, the processes vary from company to company, from workplace to workplace. So the practical side of the degree, yes, it gives you the fundamentals. Yes, it gives you an understanding of workflow. And yes, it means that you can adapt very quickly. When the technology adapts, you have the basic language and all the rest of it. But don't fixate upon it. The equipment that you worry so much during your 3 years will be in a skip within 5 years of graduation. But what doesn't go out of fashion is the theory. The book, I can't see it right now, but the book that I enjoyed most at university was Vladimir Prop, Morphology of the Russian Folktale. I used it all the way through my career because it's talking about storytelling and the structure of storytelling, and I teach it now. So I don't have it here. Oh, I do have another one. And this is the other reason. When you're at university, you learn how to read books, you learn how to get a lot of information out of a book very, very quickly, and you learn how to assimilate that into your learning and into your outlook into the world. And I was working at a TV channel as a studio floor camera operator, which meant I was standing up for 12 hours a day filming people selling stuff on Shopping TV. Not perhaps what I'd envisaged when I was at university. And they said to me, would you like to earn £50 extra a shift and sit down? Yes. And they said, well, you could be a tech op. Do you know how to line up cameras? Yes. Did I know how to line up cameras? So I bought a book. I went to a shop. Shops used to have books in them, and now you'd have to go to Amazon. But I bought this book. I used paper money, which I gave to the person, none of the plastic in those days. And I was able to read this and work out exactly the information that I needed to be able to line up the cameras on that first day a week later. And I did, and I got the job, and I earned £50 extra a shift. So this book, which I probably paid a tenner for, returned on investment on the very first shift. How much I paid for it? But yes, would have been something like that.
So if we now go into the second year, what advice would you give to students who have gone from obviously the first year of the integrate? Because first years are more, I'd say, from my point of view, is more about learning the basics, the concepts, the kind of easing you into the university lifestyle. But when second year, as a second year student myself, I feel like university has now gotten harder because it's no longer that we're building on what we learned in our first year, but in much more detail. But obviously, I come from computing degree. So what would you say from a media?
No, I think that's probably very fair to how the learning progresses through the type of university Bournemouth is. And it's based on very sound principles in the first year, exactly as you say. You learn principles of study because people could be coming from all sorts of different subjects. People do come from different A levels and with different levels of understanding. So it's very important to get that foundational learning. It's also a strongly transitional phase from school to university. So it's important that you're given that support. And then the second year, we try to move away from that. It's not that it gets more difficult, it's that you get less support. And that's done very, very deliberately, because the idea is that you start to become an independent learner and that you go away and you find things yourself. Now, you will have already noticed how we can tell you something 10 times in a lecture theatre that you will remember for a week. But if you have to find it out once yourself, you've got it for the long term. There's a huge difference in the strength of learning independently, of making mistakes, naturally making mistakes and having to fix them, having to problem solve, how to find resources, etc. Guided, but still do it independently. How much stronger that is as a learning experience, and how that allows you to develop the sorts of skills that will look after you when you're in the workplace. So that's what level 5 or the second year is there to prepare you, and it's the most painful stage. And would you believe it's not changed in the 30 years that I've been around academia, because I remember my pain in my second year as I moved to an independent form of study, and I really struggled. And my marks dipped in my second year in common with a lot of people. And then in the third year, you become wholly responsible for your journey, and your supervisor will just guide you and will provoke the type of inquiry that you really, it's your work, you own it, and you're guided and provoked towards those, finding your own way. And the third year then becomes the completion, if you like, of that journey, which is a fantastic sensation to then become a fully independent learner. And I make a distinction between that form of learning that we do at Bournemouth University, and we did at my university. I went to Falmouth College of Arts, as you know, and what you might have in a Russell Group university, where in those universities, they are taking people who are studying more traditional subjects that will have studied them at A-level and will have studied them to perhaps a higher
standard
degree, because there is a strata there is a difference in entrance requirements. So they perhaps don't need that. So on the first day of study, certainly at Oxbridge, I have it on good authority from an Oxbridge colleague that they turned up with their books ready to work independently from day one. And so one of the things that I and I'm always trying to break the mold, and it's the worst thing you can do. Sometimes you have to accept you don't know everything, and the things are the way they are for very good reason. But one of the things I try to bring further back down the curriculum and push forward, despite being quite a junior member of staff, so I really shouldn't be, is this idea of flipped learning, where we are challenging earlier and earlier students to work independently and bring their learning into the seminar room. And so we become very much this idea of the guide on the side rather than the sage on the stage. And believe you me, I love to be the man at the front, talking to 300 people at a time, telling them how brilliant I am and how much I know about a subject. But I also understand just how strong it is learning-wise for me to sit in a seminar room and listen to 10 presentations from people who've gone away and learned stuff independently, and how much more value those people get out of that learning. And at the moment, we do that very productively at level 6 and third year. We do it less productively at level 5 and second year. And at the moment, we don't do it at all at level 4 and first year. And personally, I think if we set that expectation up from first year, a seminar guided flipped learning approach will get a lot more mileage out of it, and it will be a more appropriate mode of study, of learning, as opposed to teaching for non-Russell Group universities. I think where you're talking about a red brick university, you can throw 300 people into a lecture theatre and talk at them, and they will listen because they already have foundational learning in that subject. When we are talking about more vocational study, when we're talking about more diverse classes that people haven't been able to study in that mode of study, certainly at university, with people at differing levels of understanding, then the flip model really works.
Okay.
Only the same ones I've made. You know, we all make the same mistakes, unfortunately, when it comes to study. One of them is, as things start getting worse, we stick our heads in the sand. we immediately go, la, 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 it's all fine. Don't tell anyone. Don't tell the lecturer. Don't tell them I haven't done it. Whatever it is. And we try and start it out. And it's the worst thing we can do often. It depends. It certainly depends on the lecturer. But I would say the largest percentage of my colleagues would immediately try to support a student who's struggling. And we struggle for so many different reasons, whether it's just because the subject is something that we hadn't studied before, whether it's because we've got a job outside of university, whether it's because auntie died last week, or actually worse. So the worst one seems to be when the dogs died, but, or cat. Oh my goodness, don't say that. I've got a cat. But you know what I mean? There's so many things that go on in students' lives. And I think the vast majority of my colleagues are very keenly aware of that and are there to support and to help. The idea of lecturers getting annoyed at students because they're being rubbish is an old-fashioned one, I think. I think lecturers are very aware of the range of difficulty and the range of life experiences people have, and that we are there to support. So first thing to do as a student, if you're having problems, is to put your hand up. And we have such a range of support services available. I mean, we have learning support. We literally have a department called learning support. If you have any form of additional learning support need with our learning support people, from a chat, just need a chat, they seem to be very good at that, all the way up to some very strong support if you have diagnosed or undiagnosed autism or dyslexia, dyspraxia, any learning support need. Very good at supporting that. And I think everyone is. It's very important that we're aware of neurodiversity. And as I say, what people are doing outside of university. I know I've had students who are primary carers. I had one student a few years ago who just wasn't getting the work done. And I could feel the frustration in quite a number of the teaching staff. Why, this is an intelligent student, why are they not putting the effort in? And then eventually one day they told us that they were looking after their grandparents who'd brought them up. And now to the age where one of them had gone into a home, the other one was still at home, and they were the primary carer for both of them. So, for the one at home. So yeah, you just don't know. You've got to be there's so much pastoral care to our role. There's so much about listening. So yes, if you have a problem, shout. That's the most important lesson. There are lots of people to support you. Apart from that, library is a much underused resource. It doesn't matter what your subject is. I have so many media students who say, for instance, as a demonstrator, I teach the practical side of media. I teach camera work, I teach editing. In the seminars at the moment, I'm teaching a lot of After Effects and workshops. And people say, what help books? And they might go away, they might find a technical book. And I say to them, those are reference manuals. They're useful, but actually, to a certain extent, your YouTube tutorials and your LinkedIn tutorials and the things that you can find online are better resources. What the books are useful more for is conceptual understanding of things. So, for instance, lots of students do colour correction, colour grading, and they'll talk about the technical process that they've learned through some form of technical manual or through a LinkedIn learning course from a professional, but they won't understand why. They haven't thought about complementary. The more conceptually based stuff that books do so well.
Okay, so the last question I want to ask you is, how, as a media student, either at university or about to start university, how important is a portfolio?
Yeah, that's a difficult one for me to answer. Remember, as I said at the start, I am a demonstrator, point 4 lecturer. I've been teaching at university again now for 5 years. I'm relatively early in my career, so that's a more difficult one for me to answer. My instinct would be it's not as important as a lot of people would think it would be. What it will do is it will demonstrate enthusiasm, and it will mean that person got experience, and it will also mean that they're building upon something they already have as they go through their degree. But as to whether you have to come to university with a fully formed portfolio, I would say no, you don't have to. It's something that's nice to have rather than an absolutely have to have, I would argue. Learning is the most incredible thing you can ever do. It's when you learn something, you change. Even if it's something really small, you change in some small, indefinable way. But when you learn, it's the only way you can truly change. Lots of people, throughout my life, people have said, oh, you should change, you should do this differently, or you should do that differently. You cannot just do that. You can't turn a switch and change as a person. You fundamentally will have the same belief systems, the same outlook, the same way of looking at the world. You may be able to pretend you are different, different in some way. But the only way to actually grow and change is through learning. And that's a natural process. You don't have to force it. It's a natural, enjoyable, fun process if you choose it to be so. And learning across the board can be fun. From, as I say, from that, I said earlier about learning how to sing, that seems like something impossible. If you're not one of those very few percentage of people who are tone deaf, you can learn to sing. That's amazing. My daughter has started playing violin. I picked a violin up off the internet for 20 quid. I'm now learning my grade 1 violin with her, and we're doing it together. It's brilliant. We've learned our grade 2 piano pieces together. I did play piano a little bit before, so that's a bit of a cheat, but I've never played violin together before. So there are always things you can learn. I have an old classic car that I'm not a mechanic. I've never done any mechanical professional work, but I've always tinkered with my old cars, and a friend of mine restores them. So I go over there, and I've restored mine several times. I've had it a long time. It's needed several restorations. So yeah, I think the most exciting thing in life is learning new things, and it's the only way you can change as an individual. Maybe you don't want to change. Some people are quite happy with where they are. If you want to change, grow and develop, learning is where it's at. Enjoy it, have fun with it, and don't restrict it to university. Open your eyes to the world. The university's only a method of learning. It's only one part of learning. Learning is obviously something you do as a lifelong thing, and university is an accelerated way of doing that in certain areas. But yeah, I enjoy learning. That's what I'm saying for my free-for-all.